So in this episode, we'll utilize the TSC, the MFT, and its crosscut hardware to do the taper and the bevel of our table legs. Let's get to it. So now we're going to focus on the legs and the apron, the base of the table pretty much. So if you can see here, we've got a bevel. Rather than having a butt joint on these two corners, a nice bevel so it looks like that wood just wraps around the corner. Now, there's two different ways you can attach the legs to the apron and two different ways you can do the taper on the legs. On the first table that I did, I'm going to actually put the apron behind the legs in this fashion. So the taper is going to start all the way at the top and taper down to an inch less than the full dimension at the bottom. The way I'm going to do it on this one is I'm actually going to come down the distance of the apron, which is 3.5 inches, and that is where I'm going to start my taper. So it'll be square down to that point, then down to -1 inch down here. So the first thing we're going to focus on is creating those bevels so I have a nice square corner on the outside of my legs. I always like doing those first before I start doing tapers because it helps me to keep track of where my taper is actually going to go, which direction it's going to go in. So there's a couple ways you can do that. You can utilize the full MFT3 setup with the crosscut hardware. I'm going to show you a different way, a different possibility of doing it. All you need is a table, the 2 clamps, and a scrap piece of wood. And then what I'm going to do is utilize my other pieces that I have to bevel on my legs to support the back side of my guide rail. So once I have my scrap piece of wood in there and I've got my clamp in here, I'm going to go ahead and loosen that up. Then I can take my guide rail and just slide that right in there. Slide that in the other clamp. Then, because I know that I've cut this splinter guard on this guide rail to match this saw, as long as I match up the edge of my material with the edge of that splinter guard, I just clamp this down, clamp the other one down, and I can make my bevel. So now I'm going to give you a couple tips and tricks on setting the bevel of the saw, because that's what we want to make sure we're at a true 45. If we're not a 45, then your legs will be sprawled out or tipped in a little bit. So obviously loosen the front thumb screw and the back thumb screw. Once you do that, keep one hand on the base of the saw and the other one you can use to tip the saw over. We've got a detent at 45 degrees, so I already know I'm at 45. Now I want to make sure that I tighten this front thumb screw first. Let me show you. If I tighten the back thumb screw first, just like that, next thing everybody does is they bring it close to themselves, they pick it up and they put the corner of the shoe of the saw on the table, and then they tighten this down. Well, when I did that, the weight of the saw actually pushed the front past 45 towards 0, and now I've actually got a bend in the base of the saw. So I'll just loosen that back up, loosen that front up, go back to 45. Now if I tighten the front down, it locks it in at that 45. And then the back, I don't have to worry about it. I can just tighten that down. Now I know I've got a true 45-degree bevel. If you have any more questions about setting up the TSC or the TS55, you can visit Festool USA on YouTube and watch more videos on how to set up the saws. With the way that I have it set up, all I need to do now is just pop the clamp loose, pull this one out, pull another one in, line it up, clamp it down. So once I have one leg done, I've got everything set up. It's just a matter of rinse and repeat, and then we'll have all of our legs beveled. Now that I've got all the bevels on my legs, I can start working on the tapers. Typically I like to go through and try and match up the best looking colors of the wood. I've been lucky with this piece of wood, they all look pretty close. But I'm still going to go through and go ahead and pair these up just by simply putting AA, BB, CC, and DD. You can do letters, numbers, whatever you want to do. Just whatever marks it out for you the best so you can see how they all go together. So once you have them all separated in a pile, you don't get them confused. So now that I've got everything laid out, paired together, marked the way I want it, I can show you why I always do the bevel first. When I do the bevel first, then it's much easier to lay out where the taper is going to go. Because I know if I look at these two boards, I go, okay, there's the bevel. I don't want the taper on the same side as the bevel, so that means the taper has to go on this side. So then all I need to do is just take my apron, line it flush with the top, and just put a pencil mark there. And then I can take a square to bring it across to the top. So then I've got where my taper starts up top. Come down to the bottom, measure in 1 inch from the square edge. Again, I know if I measure from the beveled edge, I'm going to be wrong. And just get a nice mark there. And if I wanted to, I could take another straight edge, line those 2 points up. Now I know that is my waist, but using this TS55 and the guide rail, I just have to have two marks. One lines up here, one lines up there. I make my cut. I've got a perfect taper. So something else I like to do to take out any chance of error, I'll get rid of a tape measure or a folding rule, and I'll just get a tri-square, mark my 1 inch, line that up. Now I know I'm set at 1 inch, so all are going to be at 1 inch. I'll use the top, I'll use the actual board, 3.5 down, 1 inch in, I'm good to go. So when I showed you how to bevel the legs, I showed you with just the guide rail and a couple clamps to do repetitive bevels. I mentioned that you could utilize the whole MFT system for crosscuts as well, and that's what I'm going to show you in this setup. So basically what I've done, I've taken the leg that I laid out before, I'm putting the piece that I want to keep underneath the guide rail, line it up with my splinter guard. Then all I did was just got a scrap piece of plywood, angled my fence rail to match what that angle is, clamp that down, put my flag stop in there. Now all I have to do is just take 4 of my 8 pieces of legs, slide them in there, and make my cuts. For the other 4, I'll have to make a slight adjustment, which I'll show you here in a second. So now it's just a matter of repeating the process to finish all the legs. So now I need to cut the mirror image of that leg for the other taper. Now if we look, here's the piece I need to cut. If I slide it in here, I'd be cutting off the wrong side. So what I did is if I just flip it upside down, then all I have to do is put it back. It's the same exact angle. The only problem is I need to adjust front to back on my piece of material, which is simply just by moving my piece of plywood and sliding this over. So now that we've got the bevels and the tapers done on our legs, if I hold this together, it gives it a nice look for a simple leg. Next step in the process will be just to knock some of these edges over. We'll round over the long edges here. We'll do some on the aprons and part of the outer frame of our tabletop as well. To continue the build video, click here or check this out. And don't forget to subscribe.